The first time I sensed something was off, I was standing in the spacious living room of my in-laws' Maplewood Heights home, staring down at the glass of deep ruby liquid in my hand. A single chandelier cast a soft glow over the gleaming hardwood floors, and the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed louder than usual. My mother-in-law, Helena Sinclair, hovered nearby with an almost casual grace, her pastel silk blouse rustling as she moved. In her other hand was an identical glass, and I watched her pour a clear fluid from a tiny vial into one of them, her slender fingers quivering ever so slightly. "Here you are, darling," she said with a sweet smile, sliding the glass toward me. "A special cocktail just for my favorite son-in-law." Her lips curved politely, but her eyes darted around the room, betraying a nervous impatience. She set the vial aside with a delicate clink, as though hiding evidence rather than placing it on plain display. I thanked her, my voice steady even though my heart thudded. "Thank you, Helena," I replied, forcing warmth into my tone. But when she wasn't looking, I swapped my drink with the one she handed to my father-in-law, Edward Sinclair, meticulously choosing the glass that still held pure sangria. Helena's husband was notorious for undermining me at every family gathering, and I thought it only fair he face whatever was really in her concoction. Just 45 minutes later, I would discover how right I'd been to trust my instincts. I am Leo Mercer, 32 years old, and for the past decade I've eked out my living as an independent photographer in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado. I started with nothing more than a second-hand camera and a fierce determination to capture truth through my lens. Weddings at quaint chapels, intimate wildlife expeditions among elk and mountain goats, and the occasional magazine feature. I had pitched images to Global Wildlife Journal and secured commissions that paid the bills if I kept my eye sharp and my shutter finger ready. But in the Sinclair household, none of that mattered. To them, I was a perpetual hobbyist, a daydreamer pretending at a profession. At every Sunday supper, they paraded me before distant relatives, presenting me as a curious footnote. "Leo's our photographer," Helena would say, as though it were a quaint pastime rather than a career. Edward, on the other hand, treated me with thinly veiled contempt, sizing me up as someone who could never provide the tangible security he valued. Equity stakes, retirement plans, forged business connections. "Are you still peddling your little snapshots?" he would smirk, leaning back in his high-backed dining chair. His expensive Italian leather loafers tapped lightly against the oriental rug. "When will you settle into something real? A desk job, perhaps?" I swallowed the irritation lumping my throat. My wife, Chloe, squeezed my hand beneath the table, her silent support warm but tinged with apology. She had begged me to attend her mother's birthday dinner, despite my exhaustion from a week spent trudging through knee-deep snow in the Yellowstone region of Wyoming, documenting the migration patterns of bison for Global Wildlife Journal. The assignment had been grueling. Blistering winds that froze my eyelashes, the constant ache of my bones in the frigid air. But it would pay our mortgage for 3 months. Yet I'd scrubbed off the mud, donned a pressed button-down shirt, and followed her to Maplewood Heights. Just a few hours, she had promised. It should have been enough. From the moment we met 6 years ago at an art exhibition in downtown Boulder, where my early work hung in a modest gallery, I knew Chloe saw me differently. She was completing her master's in environmental science at the university, her eyes alight with passion for ecosystems as I rambled on about aperture settings and frame compositions. She understood my obsession with light and shadow. I admired her devotion to preserving the natural world. Where my parents had worried about financial security, she talked about carbon footprints and regenerative agriculture. We fit together like a well-exposed photograph. Her parents, however, were a different story. Edward Sinclair embodied everything Chloe and I left behind when we chose our unconventional lives. With his crisp suits, executive office, and neatly trimmed dossier of stock holdings, he was the very picture of corporate success. Helena, initially warm in her manner, had an undercurrent of judgment edged into her praise. She complimented my prints only to ask, "When do you think you'll find something more dependable?" As though my entire creative journey were merely a prelude to the real world. I tried, for years, to win their approval. At Christmas, I would lug rare vintages from my small cellar and present them with flourish. At dinner parties, I'd casually mention a recent feature in a reputable travel magazine, evoking polite nods but never genuine warmth. I even documented family moments in glossy prints, only to find the next year that I was cropped out of group photographs, replaced by a framed diploma, a mortar board, or some artifact symbolizing the stable life they preferred. It didn't change anything. Last December, I caught Helena on the phone, her voice hushed, though tinted with condescension. Chloe could have chosen Dr. Thomas Whitaker, she said. A surgeon, family fortune, well-regulated hours. But no, she picked the creative type. The pause after creative sounded like pity rather than admiration. Edward was more overt. When Chloe and I announced we wanted to start a family, he cornered me in the study, hand steady on my shoulder. "Children are expensive, Leo," he rumbled. "You might want to think about real employment before you add mouths to feed." I never showed Chloe those moments. I loved her too much to put her in the middle. So I smiled as though he offered sound fatherly advice, nodded at Helena's coaxing compliments, and tucked my resentment away, like a camera click captured in silence. But the signs were there if I'd bothered to heed them. Helena would call Chloe away to the kitchen whenever I described a successful gallery sale, leaving me to sip lukewarm tea at a side table. She accidentally excluded me from photos or directed the camera toward her grandchildren when I stood ready to take a snapshot. Edward once suggested my instability might be best served by professional counseling, his gaze sharp enough to wound. I ignored it. In my mind, time and love would soften their rigidity. I was wrong. On the evening of her 42nd birthday, I returned from Wyoming bone-tired yet exhilarated, clutching a memory card full of brilliant frames. The perfect dividend on my hard work. I'd showered, pressed my shirt, and we rode in Chloe's car to Maplewood Heights, arriving just as the sun dipped behind the foothills. The colonial-style manor loomed over manicured gardens, its stone columns and wraparound porch designed to impress. Dinner began with forced pleasantries. Edward recounted the latest deal at Sinclair Investments, his voice a monotonous drone as Helena fussed over heirloom china and crystal stemware. Chloe's brother Andrew and his wife Sophia chatted about neighborhood politics. I nursed a local microbrew, counting the minutes until dessert. When Helena returned from the kitchen to announce her famous sangria, I volunteered to help carry glasses. That's when I noticed her 2 extra tumblers, placed slightly off to one side. As I approached, she slipped a drop from the vial into one glass, fast enough I almost missed it. I stepped forward, offering to carry both pitchers. "Let me handle these," I said, masking my alarm. I picked up the tampered glass in front of her and set it before Edward at the head of the table. He barely looked up. "Thanks," he murmured, and raised the glass to his lips. I watched him drink, then sipped water instead, claiming I was saving my palate for dessert. 45 minutes later, Edward's face had drained to ashen gray. He broke into a cold sweat and bolted from the room, retching violently in the hallway bathroom. Brittany, the live-in housekeeper, rushed to his side as Helena's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Her composure shattered, and I saw, for the first time, genuine fear in her eyes. She knew I had outsmarted her. I did not confront her then. Instead, I ate my chocolate cake in the dining room while Chloe dashed to Edward's side. The muffled sounds of his distress underscored the gravity of what had transpired. Helena, stammering about terrible shellfish, tried to explain away the calamity. I pocketed the untouched glass meant for me and remained silent. Something in me had crystallized into a cold resolve. By Monday morning, I carried the glass to Dr. Jason Patel, a former Global Wildlife Journal editor who now ran a private toxicology lab in town. When I explained my request, he raised an eyebrow. "Personal matter or professional?" he asked over the centrifuge's hum. "Family," I replied. "I need to know exactly what was in this." 3 days later, his call came. "Leo, I found benzodiazepines. Kind of sedative, enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe induce memory gaps. Nothing lethal, but certainly a deliberate exposure." "Where did you get this sample?" I thanked him and requested a written report, careful not to reveal more than necessary. That night, I told Chloe I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while, citing an upcoming exhibition, without disclosing the test results. She was disappointed but trusting. I needed time to gather evidence. Over the next fortnight, I learned Helena held multiple prescriptions for Xanax, issued by different doctors. I heard rumors of her erratic behavior, late-night parties at the local country club, whispers of petty theft, drunken arguments with neighbors. I collated every scrap of information, building a dossier in my mind. My opportunity came when Chloe mentioned her mother needed updated portraits for a social media profile. "Would you do 'em, love?" she asked, surprised at her mother's request. I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at Maplewood Heights alone, camera bag in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. My evidence. Helena met me at the door, flawless and composed. Before I unpacked a single lens, I handed her the envelope. "I thought you'd want to see this first," I said softly. Her hands trembled as she read the toxicology report and prescription printouts. "This is absurd," she whispered, eyes wide. "I would never." "We both know what happened," I interrupted. "What I need to know is why." Her face hardened. "You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures." "And drugging her husband provides security?" I kept my tone even. "It wasn't meant to hurt you," she spat back. "Just make you miss that gallery opening you've been yakking about for months. Make Chloe see you as unreliable." I let her words settle. Then I laid out my terms. She would confess to Edward, and both of them would start treating me with respect. Otherwise, I would share the lab report, prescriptions, and neighbor testimonies with my wife. My camera bag remained untouched at my side, a silent witness. She laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "She'll never believe you over us." "Perhaps," I replied. "But she'll believe documented evidence, and your own neighbors who've watched your antics. Are you willing to gamble your relationship with your daughter on that?" I left without taking any photos. That evening, Helena called Chloe in tears, accusing me of hostility and coercion during our session. When Chloe confronted me, I showed her every piece of evidence, reports, prescriptions, and threatening messages I'd secretly recorded. She defended her mother weakly, then retreated to our bedroom. For 2 weeks, she barely spoke, her eyes red with confusion and betrayal. I plunged myself into work, hoping the storm would pass. Then one afternoon, a package arrived with no return address, bearing my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You should see this. V. Sophia, Andrew's wife." On the drive were surveillance videos. Helena dosing Edward's drink that dinner night, me stepping in and swapping glasses, and then footage of a heated argument between Edward and Helena afterward, where he accused her of doing it before and suggested she get help. I watched on repeat, stunned by the pattern. And by the fact that Edward had known. I held my breath, realizing the next chapter in this war would require more than photographs. It was time for every secret to come into the light. Late one evening, I sat at my desk in the dimly lit studio apartment my wife and I shared near downtown Boulder. The laptop screen glowed with the last surveillance clip from Sophia's package. I clicked play again, listening to their voices crackle through the grainy audio. "So he knows what you did?" Edward's sharp voice echoed. Helena's response was cool and measured. "So what? It's his word against ours. Chloe will always choose family over him." Edward hesitated. "And if she doesn't?" Helena's reply was a frigid whisper. "Then she isn't the daughter I raised." A hollow dread settled in my chest. They weren't merely vindictive. This was a systematic campaign, honed over years, designed to isolate Chloe from anyone who didn't fit their blueprint. They had weaponized doubt against me, yes, but also against every person who tried to support her independence. My hands trembled as I shut the laptop. This ordeal extended far beyond my own humiliation. It threatened to rewrite Chloe's entire life. I dialed Sophia's number without hesitation. "Why did you send me this?" I demanded when she answered. Her voice was low, haunted. "They did the same thing to me when I married Andrew. They told him I wasn't good enough. It nearly destroyed us." I felt a rush of sympathy. And anger. "Why didn't you tell us back then?" Sophia paused. "Andrew worships his father. He still does. He thinks I'm paranoid. I couldn't stand by and watch them pull the same trick on you." The next morning, a text from Edward blinked on my phone. "We should talk. Man to man, no wives." I felt bile rise in my throat. "I need to hear this," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. That afternoon, I drove past Maplewood Heights and up the winding road to Boulder Country Club, where Edward kept a private lounge reserved for select members. I entered the wood-paneled room to find him seated at a marble-topped table, a tumbler of bourbon in hand. The late afternoon sun slanted through stained glass windows, igniting motes of dust that swirled like uneasy specters. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Leo," he began, voice smooth. Families are complicated. My wife, she's anxious, overprotective, but she means well. I studied him. Drugging someone? Well-meaning? He waved a dismissive hand. A misunderstanding. Helena takes anxiety meds. She mixed up the glasses. My friend's lab confirmed benzodiazepines, I replied. I have the footage. You saw it. Edward's face hardened, the veneer of congeniality cracking. What do you want? Money? You always married Chloe for her trust fund. I leaned forward, steady. I want you to leave us alone. Stop convincing Chloe I'm unworthy. Stop undermining our marriage. He laughed, a thin, mirthless sound. You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you? People trying to take advantage of our family? Chloe will come home where she belongs. Ask her about Thomas. My pulse quickened. Who is Thomas? He fixed me with a hard stare. Her fiancé before you. Nice guy, doctor. We broke that off in 6 months. We convinced her he was unfaithful. Planted evidence. Came home crying to me. History repeats, son. On the drive back, I felt a furious clarity. I needed to confirm the full pattern. I called Chloe's college roommate, Rachel Grant, whose number I'd barely used in years. Oh God, Rachel gasped when I explained. Thomas was perfect for her, until her parents told her he was two-timing her. They showed her fake texts. She didn't believe him. That sealed it. This was about absolute control. My mother-in-law and father-in-law had been manipulating Chloe's relationships since before I ever existed. They sought to mold her life like pliable clay. Over the next few days, I cast my net wide. I contacted Thomas, who reluctantly forwarded old emails in which Helena insinuated doubts about his fidelity. I tracked down other former boyfriends, men who'd tried to help with Chloe's fledgling environmental projects, only to vanish after a string of misunderstandings orchestrated by her parents. Each story fit the same mold. An outsider dared to encourage Chloe's autonomy and was swiftly discredited. Meanwhile, Sophia supplied additional clips. Helena and Edward plotting to drive us out, a scene in which Edward said, once they divorce and Chloe comes back home, she'll have the foundation to run. Then we'll find her a proper match. Their tone was clinical, as if discussing a business pivot rather than human lives. I'd compiled everything onto a portable hard drive. Then I arranged a covert dinner at our apartment. Just Andrew, Sophia, and me. Carefully concealing the truth from Chloe until the critical moment. As his dessert plates were cleared, I connected my laptop to the TV's HDMI port. There's something you both need to see, I said, voice taut. We watched for the next hour. I played the clips chronologically. The drugging incident, the kitchen argument, the country club confession, the echo of Helena's voice in Thomas's emails, the testimonies of other friends. Andrew shook his head in disbelief. This can't be real, not my parents. Sophia reached over, squeezing his hand. They did this to us, Andrew. They used our son to keep me under control. When the final clip faded, a suffocating silence fell. Chloe, who'd crept in to check on us, stood at the door, pale as moonlight. Tears streaked her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She whispered. Because I needed you to see with your own eyes, I said, rising. This isn't just about what they did to me. It's everything they've done to you. Your entire life. Andrew's eyes flitted between us and his phone. I'm sorry. I never knew. Rachel's ex-boyfriend, Thomas, had become a distant memory until that day. Andrew cradled his phone, searching the old emails Sophia had forwarded. I tried to warn you, Sophia said softly. But you wouldn't listen. That night, Chloe climbed into bed beside me. Exhaustion etched into her features. I need time to process, she said, her voice raw. But I believe you. I wrapped my arms around her. I'll be here when you're ready. The next morning, the phone rang. Chloe answered. Hello? No, Mom, I'm not sick. I'm fine. She pressed the phone to her chest, eyes locked on mine. She wants me to come home. She handed me the phone on speaker. Darling, Helena's cheerily artificial voice poured through the speaker. Your father and I are worried. Marriage can be trying. Maybe some time apart will give you clarity. Chloe's reply was steel-edged. Mom, I've seen the videos. Another awkward pause. What videos? Helena faltered. You heard me, Chloe said. The security footage. Of you drugging Leo's drink. Of you and Dad scheming to break up my marriage. On the other end, Helena's voice trembled with outrage. Those videos have been manipulated. Leo has always been jealous. Stop, Chloe cut in, her tone decisive. We're coming over tonight, all of us. Andrew, Sophia, Leo, and me. We're going to talk as a family. No more lies. After she hung up, Chloe looked at me. They'll deny everything. They'll try to twist this on you. I know, I said, but for the first time, they'll have to reckon with the real me, the one who tells stories with more than pictures. That evening, we arrived at the Sinclair's grand colonial home once more. The porch lights glowed like watchful eyes. Andrew and Sophia were already seated stiffly in the living room, Sophia's grip on Andrew's arm a silent plea for solidarity. Edward opened the door with a practiced smile. Helena's face was chalk white. Edward ushered us in. Let's clear the air, he said, leading us to the sitting room. I carried my camera tripod and set it up by the mantel as Chloe and Andrew exchanged uneasy glances. Andrew's voice was tight. What are you doing? I clicked the camera into place, documenting this conversation. For our family archives. Helena's gasp echoed off the high ceilings. This is private family business. Exactly, I replied, locking eyes with her. It's family business, and I'm family, even if you've tried hard to prove otherwise. For the next 2 hours, we laid out the evidence. I spoke calmly, presenting each clip and email in turn. Edward initially stood his ground, accusing me of deceit and paranoia, but with every denial, I played another recording. Their defenses grew feebler, their faces drained of color. When the final file, Edward's confession that he'd planted false evidence against Thomas, played, even he could no longer hide his shame. The room was so cold, it felt like snow drifting through open windows. Chloe rose, her voice trembling but unwavering. I love you both, you're my parents, but what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control me anymore. Andrew stood beside her. We're adults. We choose our own lives. Tears streamed down Helena's cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the realization that her dominion was crumbling. Edward looked as though he'd been stripped of every protective layer, exposed and naked before his children. As we prepared to leave, I handed Edward a USB drive. This has everything, I said. Edward frowned, suspicion etched in every line of his face. It means I won't share this with others, I continued. I respect Chloe. She's my wife. But if you ever meddle again, these files go to your country club board, your business associates, your socialites. They'll see the truth of your actions. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in Edward's eyes. I underestimated you, he whispered. Yes, I agreed. You did. 6 months passed. Chloe and Andrew began therapy to heal the wounds their parents had inflicted. Helena and Edward kept their distance, sending occasional texts of reconciliation, but honoring our boundaries. Then, over the winter holidays, I found a handwritten invitation on our doorstep. A fresh start. Dinner at the Sinclair home. Chloe hesitated. They're still my parents, she said softly. I know, I replied. Let's go, but carefully. That evening, the Sinclair's dining room was warm with laughter and the smell of roasted vegetables. Helena moved with practiced grace, serving dishes like a seasoned hostess. Edward asked about my latest projects with genuine curiosity. After dinner, Edward slipped into his study with me. He poured 2 scotches, one for each of us. I have a proposition, he began, voice congenial. Your work has merit, but the market is unpredictable. I'd like to offer you a junior partner position at Sinclair Investments. Substantial salary, stability. I took the glass, but left it untouched. Why, Edward? He smiled, a softening of his previously imperious demeanor. You protected my daughter, showed integrity. That's what a real man does. I respect that. I met his gaze. I appreciate the offer, but no. His features tightened. Be reasonable. This is an olive branch. I stood. Another attempt at control. You can't buy me, and you can't change how Chloe loves me. He hissed, dropping the veneer. Everyone has a price. I shook my head. Not everyone. Returning to the living room, I saw Helena showing photo albums to Chloe. Images from childhood, carefully selected to evoke nostalgia. Chloe caught my eye. With a slight nod, she rose. Mom, Dad, she announced, voice clear and strong. I stood beside her, feeling the weight of every truth we'd uncovered. It was the moment they'd feared. Their children reclaiming their own narratives, refusing to be edited by anyone else. A hush fell over the Sinclair residence as Chloe's voice pierced the tension. We stood in the softly lit foyer, the glow from the Christmas tree in the living room casting long, wavering shadows on the hardwood floor. Helena and Edward had assembled at either end of the threshold, their faces a compound of relief and lingering wariness. Andrew and Sophia lingered behind us, silent witnesses to this fraught family reunion. "I have something to tell you," Chloe began, her tone steady but throbbing with emotion. She placed a hand on my arm, then lifted her other hand to rest on her belly. "Leo and I are expecting a baby. I'm 3 months along." For a moment, the world contracted to that single declaration. Helena blinked twice, then rushed forward, her features smoothing into tears of joy as she enfolded Chloe in a fierce embrace. Edward approached more cautiously, as if uncertain how to bridge the distance. He paused, studying the subtle swell of Chloe's waist, then offered a stiff smile. "Congratulations," he said, his voice flat but genuine enough. "Thank you," I replied, allowing a polite warmth to slip through. Then, with my voice lowered so that only Edward could hear, I added, "But know this, our child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." Edward's brow furrowed, yet after a long beat he inclined his head once. The nod felt like an acknowledgement of our resolve, that at last the boundaries were drawn. On the drive back to our small cottage near the Flatirons foothills, Chloe reached across the console and took my hand. Moonlight silvered her hair through the windshield. "They'll never change, will they?" she whispered. I exhaled, watching taillights recede into the dark. "No," I admitted, "but they'll have to accept that we have." 3 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at our rented bungalow. Inside was a deed transferring the property to our names, courtesy of Edward's attorney. Beneath it lay trust documents establishing a fund for our unborn baby. No letter, no caveats, just a clean, irrevocable grant of security. It wasn't an apology in words. Edward was incapable of grace. But it was an acknowledgement, in the only way he knew how, that we had prevailed. Summer arrived, and on a warm July morning in Boulder's University Hospital, our daughter Eliza entered the world with a cry that sounded like sunlight bursting through clouds. We named her after my grandmother, a woman whose quiet strength had shaped me. When Helena and Edward came to visit, they brought carefully wrapped gifts and wore expressions of proud reserve. They cooed over Eliza's button nose, snapped photos with their phones, and, remarkably, refrained from lecturing us on feeding schedules or college funds. Months passed, and each visit grew less fraught. They never uttered the words, "I'm sorry," but day by day they stopped undermining our lives. Instead, they maintained a respectful distance, an olive branch of sorts. One crisp autumn evening, I was in my home studio turned office poring over images from an alpine landscape shoot when Chloe entered, cradling Eliza in her arms. "My mom called," she said, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I wiveled in my chair, resting my chin on my hand. "What do you think?" I asked. Chloe's gaze drifted to the window, where the first snowflakes were beginning to drift. "I want to," she said softly, "but on our terms." She set Eliza in her portable bassinet. "We stay at a hotel, not their house. We come and go as we please. No unsupervised visits with Eliza." I nodded, a slow, steady affirmation. "That sounds reasonable." She perched on the edge of my drafting table, bouncing Eliza gently in her arms. The baby's eyes flickered with wonder at the shifting light. "I used to think success meant making my parents proud," Chloe said, her voice wistful. "Meeting their expectations. Now, I know it's about making choices I'm proud of. Standing by the people I love." I smiled and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "And you've never made me prouder." 2 weeks before Christmas, another envelope arrived. This one embossed with the Sinclair Investments logo. Inside lay the company's annual report, printed on glossy stock. As I flipped through, I realized the photographs lining nearly every spread. Sweeping mountain vistas, crisp architectural shots of Denver landmarks, intimate portraits of entrepreneurs were all mine. At the back was a brief, typed note. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want to see the final product." No grand apology, no emotional entreaty, just a nod of professional respect. It wasn't forgiveness, it was something more durable. recognition of my work on my own terms. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood that this gesture marked a shift, one that said, I see your worth, but on your own path. That spring, I opened my first gallery in downtown Boulder. It occupied a bright loft space on Pearl Street, floor-to-ceiling windows framing alpine peaks on the horizon. The grand opening drew friends, former clients, and curious passers-by. Inside, my photographs, some shot in Yellowstone, others in the Sangre de Cristo range, danced across the walls like stories waiting to be told. Chloe held Eliza on her hip, introducing guests who cooed over the baby before wandering into the gallery. My parents flew in from Portland, Oregon, beaming with pride as they signed the guest book and praised the curatorial flow I'd designed. Toward the end of the evening, just as I was pouring the last of the champagne for departing friends, Edward and Helena slipped through the gallery doors. Helena's eyes widened at the scale of the exhibit. Edward surveyed the crowd, then approached me. Leo, he said, extending a hand, these images, they're exceptional. His voice carried genuine warmth. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you. He gestured to the nearest print, a panoramic shot of elk in hoary dawn light. This one? You captured something I've never seen before. I met his gaze. That's the world through my lens. He glanced at Chloe and Eliza, then back to me. You've built something remarkable. I offered a quiet smile. On my own terms. They didn't stay long. Helena held Eliza for a moment, under Chloe's watchful gaze, and Edward lingered at the edge of the crowd, nodding once before he and Helena stepped out into the night. As Chloe and I locked up the gallery, the last glow of street lamps spilling onto the quiet sidewalk, she slipped her hand into mine. Do you think they've changed? She asked, voice laden with hope and uncertainty. I paused, listening to our footsteps echo on the pavement. Finally, I answered, No, I don't think they've changed. She's liable to ask why, but I went on, but they've accepted they can't change us. Sometimes that's enough. Over the next months, our life settled into a new rhythm. Gallery openings, family dinners on our terms, playground afternoons with Eliza. One evening, as we sat on our front porch watching the stars emerge above the Rockies, Eliza slept soundly in her crib upstairs. The faint scent of pine drifted on the breeze. I turned to Chloe and said, I realized something tonight. She looked at me curious. What's that? That I didn't win by playing Edward and Helena's game, I said, my voice soft. I won by refusing to play it at all. I stood my ground, protected what mattered most, and built a life defined by my own choices. She leaned her head on my shoulder. That's the best revenge of all. I nodded, gazing into the vast Colorado sky. Living well, on my own terms, with the family I loved beside me,